Hey guys, this is Mikro. I wanted to make a video on an updated meta attack strat in terms of New World. The defense has been fairly similar than before. I think the biggest change on defense is a lot of people have been prioritizing B gate, but the attacker strat has changed a lot due to a couple things. The first major thing is horns now. They are significantly less good because it applies new fortify, not old fortify, so it's not like a invincibility thing, it's just a decent heal, but it will just basically be negated by something like a disease, or really you don't really have to worry about it that much anymore. A 500 HP tick per second relative to what heals are normally at is just not super good, and that's about all it's worth. It'll never be a debuff, like I know some people talk about that all the time, but it's never going to be close to being a debuff. It will be beneficial to everyone in the army, but it's just not as OP as it once was. And because this has happened, a lot of the strat has changed and evolved from like kind of pushing to their backline and trying to kill their healers, but not be in that spot where the horns will benefit people, to people just straight up ignoring horns, playing in the background, harassing healers, and then just trying to flip the map almost entirely just to give their team a better chance to pick off healers and put pressure on them to give their army a better chance of winning. In this strat where you see a lot of people just zerging into the backline, seems very, very common now. I've seen wars now where people have 50 in the backline. I've seen wars where people have 30 to 40 in the backline. It is not uncommon, and you have to do it in order to allow your kill squad to live. And that's kind of a base thing that people have been doing off at the start. The other thing that, if it's not obvious from the OPRs, if you haven't been in wars, or if you've been in wars, I'm sure you're aware of this, but it is a very, very heavy ranged meta in terms of the defense and how it's evolved. Musket may no longer be present, but that just has been vacated and filled by bows and fire staff. It seems like there are about 10 to 15 range players per war, whether it be a fire staff, a blunderbuss, or a bow, as well as melee zerg squads to kind of counter some of the more niche setups and kind of hit the healers more consistently than other things. Those are usually in the form of disruptor builds, which are still being played, but are a little bit less tanky than they once were. That being said, if your entire army plays their road, then your disruptors are fairly safe. It's very easy to disrupt, and you could very easily take over the backline. As well as there's no longer muskets on top of the walls to consistently blow the horn, so it's kind of hard to punish this flip map sort of setup. And this is what people have been rolling out with on the start very, very commonly. They will send one group to A, and then they'll usually wrap a side. They'll pick either Bond side or they'll pick Bond, and then they'll just rush people through that. They won't really worry about the healers in their backline. Their healers are literally expected to flip map, play the fort side because it's literally safer for the attackers for the healers to be on the fort side than it is to be on the war camp side at this point. And you just kind of get back there, you start getting kills, you start ticking, and you hope for the best. At the end of the day, if you are trading on attack at this point in a war, you are favored. And that's what people play to do off the beginning, and they usually do it by zerging B. You can also do a thing where you just go to the free point. I find that to be less effective now. It's the free point feels a lot more free than it did before. That being said, if people do contest you on the free point, you notice people contest it all the time. It's a really good strat to go to the free point first and then force a contest and then have people kind of leak out the other gates and try to get like a triple influence thing going, and then you will usually get 2 points for free just off of that alone, off of confusion. And that's a really easy way to get into fort very, very fast if people actually do try to contest that, which is why it was never really done in the EU meta before, from my understanding, but some people have been discovering that the hard way as of recent. After you get the side point, usually what people will do is they'll do some sort of split. The main thing that is emphasized on this whole outside phase is people play in the other team's road. That means, like, if you're in on the war camp side, you are playing in the attacker's road, which normally would not make sense, but due to the fort change, there is not really much of a decentralizing to playing in the road. The horns are really not that impactful. People will not be on the walls. If you take that side, you will just be basically safe, and there's not a way to really easily contest the healers, and then you can just contain the respawns very, very easily as well. So there's not much of a downside to doing it, and it seems just generally like the best idea is to play in the other side's road, and that is what people have been doing. Usually they'll people will kind of send from B to C. Attackers will or defenders will kind of pick, do they want C last, do they want B last, and then attackers will just keep juggling until they get one of those for free. If you're in a spot where you say you got C last, you'd go to B, and very similar story, you would just play in their road. It's not very complicated, and you just try to frag out any other team's healers. Once the healers are pressured or dead, it's just going to be a free point tick. And it's because of this that a lot of the point meta has evolved into trying to live without the presence of healers, and a lot more builds are built on just being tanky alone because healers tend to not live very long in the current meta due to them being light, large presence of melee being in the backline, and everyone's top priority at this point is hitting healers because it's just a lot easier to hit healers and to punish that than it is to go through clumps with all the VG changes, the Ren changes, and the whatnot. The healers are by far the weakest link now. You can't necessarily go through people, especially with SNS as well. Weaken being kind of OP, it feels inconsistent to just ram into the point team and just hope for a win unless you're doing a giant detonate push, which is why going through healers and going through backlines is generally the preferred method in the current meta. Once you get into fort, people break the gates. This is very standard. I don't really want to go into this in depth, other than saying that the siege actually does damage now, and I would recommend using that to help break the gates if you do not have a lot of base damage alone. It will hit for about 7,000 per hit and then 9,000 on a crit. So that's a lot better than any other build can traditionally do, and you usually end up with the influx of cleanse pots by the end of the war. So if you're in a spot where you can afford it, I would recommend actually buying Siege now because they spawn at level 3 and they do significant damage. Usually people spread out, hit their gates, kind of rotate between each gate to an extent. There's some leeway there. Once our gates are broken, this is the old default that people used to do. It was very, very balanced. This has kind of been reformed to something that was kind of an older meta, but then fell out of favor again because if people were too clumped, they would just die latch patch to, again, zerging aside, and that has been the more common meta I have seen as of recent. The main reason why people are kind of sticking to zerging aside is ranged players just kind of counter if you are split, range players tend to get more value than if you're balled. You can kind of feel that in OPR as well. If you're a 15-man ball versus a 15-man rage stack, you will do fine. But if you're three groups of five versus a 15-man rage stack, you are just going to get farmed. And that was kind of the same case in war. Healers tend to get farmed very, very easily off the walls. Blunderbusses can blow up clumps very easily with the plague splitting grenades now due to the buff to damage from the actual blunderbuss itself due to the orichalcum cartridges not counting towards the damage bonus. So basically, Blunderbuss got a 20% damage buff on top of all the other nerfs that happen to Fortify. The main saving grace is everyone's warding the fire, but if that went away, like, oh man, Blunderbuss is gonna pump even more. But it pumps a lot right now, and people have been doing weird things to get around stuff. Like if people are slotting fire gems, they're kind of running like an elemental gem to get around that, which won't help versus elemental aversion, but does hard counter healers, which specifically usually run physical aversion, and then they are weak to non-fire ranged attacks, which is what people have been trying to navigate around in terms of resistances. But it kind of depends on your server. If everyone's just running elemental aversion, there's no point of doing that. You have to go through the elemental aversion, and honestly, you will do enough damage to just go through the elemental aversion due to how insanely strong fire staff and blunderbuss are. That being said, bows tend to be a little bit better pressure from the wall point of view and from on the ground point of view, but all of those can do very, very well, and it's just kind of up to player preference. You just need a good balance of all of them in your army. So the main idea behind Zerking aside is you just overwhelm aside, you get presence in fort, you live, and then from there you can reinforce it. All the meta strats are evolved around Zerging aside. There's not much different. They're just kind of go between different gates. The one that's common is you see one person or one group kind of hang out on the side that's usually getting pelted by fire staffs and often will not survive the rotation, but will try to rotate to reinforce B while goes through, C goes through, and the back gate goes through. So that's something that is like pretty common. And then you just end up overwhelming one side, you get that side control, your healers get established, you try to control up top, and then from there you kind of go into the fort and have your best shot. There's another strategy that's been very, very common where you flood the back gate. The reason why this is so common is the rain pressure is so significant on these side gates and on B gate that people have been flooding back gate because this angle to actually hit the back gate is a lot steeper and it's very, very difficult to do consistently, which is why it's just been so effective. So that's one strat that's also very similar. Same concept. You zerg through it, you run through it, you get to the back gates. The main thing that counters this is you could put This is going to sound weird to some people, but you can keg this rotation very easily, and it's not a spot that can be easily hit from attackers. The best way to counter this is to literally drop ice showers out in advance, try to scout the kegs, because you can see them through the walls that they start ticking from damage. And once those kegs are down, you push, but the keg can easily wipe your entire army, so you have to be careful from that. But the same idea as you flood through back, you support the side gate, you meet up with your point team, and then you send your respawns through B usually, and you just try to reinforce and hope for the 50-50. And then the last strat I would say is kind of meta at this point is kind of a spray and pray approach, I would call it, where you just run through B, hope you have the better SNS, sit on point, let your range players shoot the point as much as possible. You play near the top of point ideally, and then your range literally just cover your healers because they're all on that choke. People will usually drop down, but usually your range will be able to deal with it, especially if they have like some sort of kill squad group that has like a spear or uh, a blunderbuss or a greatsword or any of those kind of weapons that can contest people who drop. You have one of those and it's kind of lights out. People won't be able to get in your back line. You're able to take point for free. And this is just a strat where you're just like hoping for the best. You're flipping 50-50 point over and over and over again. The main thing is you just try to get through, again, get on healers. It's okay if these other gates get repaired at times. It's not very important. But the main idea is that you are just getting through, controlling half the fort, and then playing from there. You don't have to always go the same side. People mix it up. They'll go from like the spray and play strat to the zerging aside to like the old default. They'll kind of flip flop between these, and there's like four major ones that people have been doing. And they'll also flip flop the sides, so there's a lot of different combinations that you can go through. And the main idea is that the defenders make a mistake, you could potentially win the war, but you're probably not going to win the war unless a defender makes a mistake in a current meta, just to how strong the defenders are in terms of ranged pressure. And it's very, very difficult to get on the walls without getting forced out compared to other metas. Muskets had issues where they couldn't see everyone around them, and it was possible to kind of sneak up behind them and get assassinate kills, even with the mortal empower state of the game. With fire staff, that's not really the case. You get on the fire staff, you're going to get showered, or you're not really going to be able to close that gap. You are going to get bursted if you're a melee. So it's not really possible to get this top control very consistently. And a lot of the times, people are just playing for fort, getting on point, and hoping for the best. It's not a very pretty meta, but the meta so far has been just overwhelm aside and hope for the best at that point. Get on point, get up top, whatever the shot caller decides, and go from there. And I'll see you guys in the next one.